I'm interested in what's happening with the New York Times and this trans pushback. I don't know if you guys saw this, but all these groups like GLAAD and all these trans activist groups wrote this scathing letter to the New York Times. They're very angry that the Times is making an attempt at sort of fair and balanced coverage on the trans issues, in particular transitioning children. Like they've done a couple of pieces that come close to being fair. That's as generous as I could be. I read the pieces. And the activists are angry and demanding action. They think that the Times has gone bigoted. They want real change. They want him, of course, to appoint a bunch of trans writers at the New York Times. This is always the solution. Like, we demand you hire 5 trans people and so on. They say things like this. Plenty of reporters at the Times cover trans issues fairly. Their work is eclipsed, however, by what one journalist has calculated as over 15,000 words of front-page Times coverage debating the propriety of medical care for trans children published in the last 8 months alone. We won't stand for the Times platforming lies, bias, fringe theories, and dangerous inaccuracies. We demand fair coverage. We demand the Times platform trans voices as both sources and full-time writers and editors, and we demand a meeting between Times leadership and the transgender community. So what is the Times going to do? Right? I mean, I feel like if this happened at NBC, they'd be on the knee doing exactly what was demanded of them. But interesting, and the Times may yet do that, but interestingly, the Times, was it today? Yes, this Thursday, in a piece from Pamela Paul in the op-ed section, supports J.K. Rowling. So, I mean, you could read this as a middle finger to the activists, because what did they do in response to the critique that they're too fair on these issues? They got even fairer and put Pamela Paul in there talking about, I'll give you a segment from it. They said, she writes, if more people stood up for J.K. Rowling, they would not only be doing right by her, they'd also be standing up for human rights, specifically women's rights, gay rights, and yes, transgender rights. They'd be standing up for the truth. Wow. All right. So what is this telling us?
I was going to say, I'd also note that late last night, apparently the New York Times PR department issued a short statement that basically amounted to, we're proud of our reporting. We hear you, we sympathize, but there was no retraction or apology or anything like that. I think my favorite part of the complaint, Megyn, is that they had identified a terrible anti-trans, dangerous right-wing extremist who had recently joined the New York Times. And that, of course, is the former colleague of Michael and myself, David French. And as we all know, when you think right-wing extremism, when you think hate, when you think frothing at the mouth, furious denunciations, and no empathy whatsoever, you think of David French. Now, perhaps
no, it's like Alex Jones and David French. That's what you think.
Yeah, well, David French has he written things that I'm sure trans activists disagree with strongly? Yes. Does he hold opinions that they disagree with? Yes. Do I agree with everything David French has ever written? No. But the idea that, the New York Times is going to turn into some sort of, dangerous right-wing propaganda stirring up hate crimes because of the presence of David French is probably one of the most absurd claims they possibly could have made. And I think it gives away the game, which is that they're not interested in having a debate or discussion on this. They really think that the side of the argument or other perspectives should not be heard and should not be seen. The New York Times is their territory, not anybody else's, and that anybody who disagrees with the party line must be expunged and driven out as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. But it seems like, Michael, this is like this is an important moment for the Times, and so far they're handling it pretty well.
Yeah, this is interesting. I think the letter itself was evidence that something had changed at the Times, because previously, what in the last big controversy, which was the Tom Cotton op-ed sending the National Guard to stop the rioting during 2020. That controversy began as an internal revolt on the internal chat rooms of the New York Times, then leaked out as a series of organized tweeting by New York Times employees, and it resulted in the firing of the New York Times opinion editor James Bennett after a day-long struggle session in front of the entire staff. And then it led swiftly to Barry Weiss leaving the New York Times. A couple of other conservatives that were involved in the op-ed page left as well. This looks like an internal revolt already failed. And so the New York Times staffers went outside, recruited as many outside contributors as possible, and then went to GLAAD, an outside activist organization. And this was a mistake that the Times, institutionalists really took advantage of by saying, well, GLAAD is an advocacy organization. We're a news organization. In fact, the Times rebels, I think, handed an easy victory to the old school New York Times staff that still wants to retain some legitimacy as a news organization. And we have to be honest, the 2 or 3 stories that these activists are complaining about are really milquetoast stuff. I mean, it just, just raising questions, just giving examples of a detransitioner in one space or a parent who was deceived by their school district in another case. But the activists can't see it, and they can't imagine themselves being wrong on the issue, right? They just don't. One of the arguments they give is that, well, gender transition surgery and drugs have been accepted for decades. Well, one, it's not true that this has been accepted for decades, especially puberty blockers. That's entirely why we're having this controversy. It's because this is new. And two, just 2 decades of evidence, it would have said, if you were just going by that, you'd say that we should still be doing lobotomies.
Look, you did the tough thing during COVID. You paid your people and pulled your business through the pandemic. And now doing the tough thing could qualify you for up to $26,000 per employee at covidtaxrelief.org. Government funds are available right now to reward companies with 2 or more employees who stayed open during COVID. This is not a loan, and you don't have to pay it back. The program's complicated, but no one knows more about it than the CPAs and tax experts at covidtaxrelief.org. You pay nothing up front, they do all the work, and then they share a percentage of the cash they get you. Businesses of all types, including nonprofits and churches, can qualify, including those who took PPP loans, even if you had increases in sales. You did the tough thing for your employees during COVID. Let covidtaxrelief.org help you. In particular, help you get up to $26,000 per employee. Visit covidtaxrelief.org, covidtaxrelief.org, covidtaxrelief.org. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.